Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, you're not alone. For the next 2 hours, let your thoughts fade as these unsettling stories fill the silence. If you're watching this right now, tap the like button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Let the darkness settle and let the stories take over. The listing seemed perfect. 5 stars, over 200 reviews, and photos that made the spacious Vermont cabin look like something out of a magazine. Secluded luxury in the Green Mountains, the description read. Complete privacy with breathtaking views. The host, Richard, had superhost status and responded to my questions within minutes. After months of working non-stop at the firm, I needed this getaway with Emma more than I could express. "What do you think?" I asked, showing her the listing on my phone. Emma scrolled through the photos, her tired eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "It's gorgeous, Liam, and the price isn't bad for a full week." I watched as she lingered on photos of the stone fireplace, the sprawling deck overlooking dense forest, and the clawfoot tub next to a window with mountain views. We'd been dating for 3 years, but the past 6 months had been tough. Both of us working overtime, passing each other like ships in the night in our cramped Boston apartment. This was exactly what we needed to reconnect. "I'm booking it," I said, already entering my payment information. When the confirmation email arrived, I felt a surge of anticipation. 1 month until we'd be surrounded by nature, no neighbors, no deadlines, no alarm clocks. Just us. The drive took longer than expected. Google Maps directed us off the interstate onto progressively smaller roads until we were climbing a winding gravel path that my sedan struggled to navigate. Cell reception became spotty, then non-existent. "Are you sure this is right?" Emma asked, checking the printed directions Richard had emailed us. He said the turnoff would have a blue mailbox. Just as doubt was settling in, we rounded a bend and saw it. A weathered blue mailbox with no name, just the number 17 painted in white. The driveway beyond it disappeared into thick trees. "This is it," I said, feeling both relief and a strange hesitation I couldn't explain. The cabin emerged from the forest like a revelation. 2 stories of natural wood and stone, larger than it had appeared in the photos. The November sun was already dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the wraparound porch. "It's even better than the pictures," Emma whispered, her breath visible in the chilly air. As we pulled up, I noticed there were no other cars or signs of human presence. The quiet was absolute. No traffic noise, no distant voices, just the rustle of wind through nearly bare trees. Perfect isolation. Exactly what we'd paid for. The key was under the mat as promised. Inside, the cabin was even more impressive. Vaulted ceilings with exposed beams, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows that would offer spectacular views in daylight. Now they reflected our images against the darkening forest outside. "Let me get a fire going," I said, noticing that Richard had left kindling and logs ready in the hearth. "You want to explore?" Emma nodded and disappeared upstairs while I arranged the wood and found matches in a drawer. The fire caught quickly, sending flickering light across the hand-hewn furniture. Everything looked rustic yet expensive. Authentic, but too perfect, like a movie set of a mountain retreat. "Liam," Emma called from upstairs. "Come look at this." I found her in the master bedroom, standing by the window. The room was stunning, a king-sized bed with a handcrafted headboard, plush rugs on hardwood floors, and a bathroom with that promised clawfoot tub. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed across the room. "There are no curtains or blinds on any of the windows." I hadn't noticed at first, but she was right. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the bedroom offered a spectacular view of the mountains, but also meant anyone outside could see directly in. Well, The listing did say complete privacy, I reasoned. There's not another house for miles. Emma nodded, but looked unconvinced. I guess it just feels exposed. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. Hey, that's part of the adventure, right? Being a little wild, away from civilization? She laughed and relaxed against me. You're right, I'm being silly. Who's gonna see us out here? We unpacked, and I opened a bottle of wine I'd brought. Emma found a Bluetooth speaker in the living room and connected her phone. Soon Nina Simone's voice filled the cabin as we prepared a simple dinner from the groceries we'd picked up in the last town. It was perfect, exactly the romantic evening I'd envisioned. But as we ate by firelight, I noticed Emma glancing repeatedly toward the dark windows. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, it's just... Do you ever feel like you're being watched? I chuckled. By the bears and deer? I'm serious, Liam. Something about these windows at night. They're like black mirrors. I looked around. She had a point. With the lights on inside and pitch darkness outside, the windows reflected our images while revealing nothing of what might be out there. Wait here, I said, setting down my wine glass. I went to the front door and flipped on the exterior lights. They illuminated the porch and a small area of the yard, but beyond that was impenetrable darkness. Still, it made the windows less mirror-like. Better? I asked when I returned. She smiled gratefully. Much. After dinner, we sat on the couch with our wine, talking about nothing important. It felt good, normal in a way our relationship hadn't felt in months. The stress of the city seemed far away. Around 11, Emma yawned. Ready for bed? I asked. She nodded, but as we climbed the stairs, I noticed her glance back at the windows one more time. I woke to sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows. Emma was still asleep beside me, her face more relaxed than I'd seen it in months. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs to make coffee. In daylight, the cabin was even more impressive. The views were spectacular. Mountains rising in the distance, their slopes painted with the last of autumn's colors. Our nearest neighbor was completely out of sight. I found myself appreciating Richard's design choice regarding the windows. They framed the natural beauty perfectly, making the inside of the cabin feel like an extension of the wilderness outside. I took my coffee to the deck and breathed deeply. The air smelled of pine and earth. A light mist hung in the valleys between distant ridges, giving the landscape an otherworldly quality. For the first time in months, I felt my perpetual tension beginning to unwind. My peaceful moment was interrupted by Emma joining me, wrapped in a blanket. Morning, she said, accepting the coffee mug I offered. This view is incredible. Worth the drive? Definitely. She leaned against the railing. Sorry about being weird last night. I think I was just tired from the trip. No worries. It was a long day. We spent the morning exploring the property. Behind the cabin, a trail led into the woods, eventually opening onto a small private pond. There was a wooden dock with 2 Adirondack chairs facing the water. We sat there for a while, talking about what we wanted to do during our week away. Hiking, reading, cooking elaborate meals together, all the things we never had time for at home. Around noon, we returned to the cabin for lunch. As we approached from the trail, I noticed something that gave me pause. Did you close the deck door when we left? I asked Emma. She looked up, following my gaze to the sliding glass door that stood partially open. I thought you did. We exchanged glances. I had been the last one out, and I was almost certain I'd closed it. Almost. Probably just didn't latch it properly, I said, forcing a casual tone. The wind must have pushed it open. Inside, everything looked untouched. I did a quick walkthrough while Emma made sandwiches. Nothing was missing or disturbed. I must have left the door open after all. After lunch, Emma wanted to drive to the nearest town to pick up some extra groceries and check out the local shops. The quaint Vermont town was exactly what you'd expect. A main street with boutiques, a general store, and a coffee shop with locally roasted beans. For the first time since arriving, I checked my phone and found several missed calls from work. I ignored them. "This is perfect," Emma said as we browsed a bookstore. "I could stay here forever." "In this bookstore? Because I'm pretty sure they close eventually." She playfully swatted my arm. "You know what I mean. Away from everything, just us." We returned to the cabin as sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and pinks. I unloaded groceries while Emma went upstairs to shower. When I finished, I noticed a business card on the counter that hadn't been there before. Richard Cavendish, Property Management. I flipped it over. On the back was a handwritten note: "Hope you're enjoying your stay. Let me know if you need anything." Had Richard been in the cabin while we were out? The thought made me uncomfortable, but I reasoned that it was his property. Maybe he routinely checked on guests. Still, I would have preferred advance notice. I went to the living room and looked through the guest information binder I'd noticed earlier. Sure enough, it mentioned that the owner occasionally conducted property checks during guest stays. Mystery solved. When Emma came downstairs, I showed her the card. "That's a little intrusive," she said, frowning. "He should have texted first." "It's mentioned in the binder," I pointed out. Still weird. I couldn't disagree. As I prepared dinner, I found myself glancing at the windows more often than necessary, wondering if Richard was out there watching his property and us. On our third night, I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. according to the bedside clock. The cabin was silent, except for Emma's steady breathing beside me, but something had disturbed my sleep. I lay still, listening. Nothing seemed amiss, but a sense of unease kept me from drifting back to sleep. Finally, I got up to use the bathroom. The house was dark, except for small nightlights in the hallway. As I passed one of the large windows overlooking the front of the property, movement caught my eye, a faint light moving among the trees. I froze, staring into the darkness. The light appeared again, bobbing slightly as if someone was walking with a flashlight. Then it disappeared. My heart raced. Who would be on the property at this hour? Could it be Richard, checking something? Or perhaps hikers who had gotten lost? Neither explanation felt right at 3 a.m. I considered waking Emma but decided against it. Instead, I went downstairs and checked that all the doors were locked. They were. I peered out various windows but saw nothing unusual. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have been an animal with reflective eyes caught in the moonlight, or possibly a neighbor walking on their own property. I returned to bed but slept fitfully until morning. At breakfast, I debated whether to mention the light to Emma. She seemed so relaxed and happy, I didn't want to introduce any tension. I decided to keep it to myself. Later that day, we hiked to a nearby waterfall mentioned in Richard's guidebook. The trek was invigorating, and the cascading water spectacular. We took photos and ate the lunch we packed. For a few hours, I forgot about the strange light. On our way back, Emma stopped suddenly on the trail. "Someone's been here," she said, pointing to footprints in a muddy section that hadn't been there on our way out. "Probably other hikers," I suggested. "The prints are coming from that direction." She pointed to a dense thicket, not from the main trail. Who would come through there? I examined the prints. They were from boots, definitely human. Maybe a park ranger or local who knows shortcuts? Emma seemed unsatisfied with my explanation but continued walking. Back at the cabin, she went straight to her phone. "No service still," she muttered. "I wanted to check the reviews again." "What for?" "I don't know. Just to see if anyone mentioned anything unusual." I felt a twinge of concern. Like what? She hesitated, like feeling watched. So she had sensed it too, that subtle wrongness that was beginning to permeate our perfect getaway. I decided to come clean about the light I'd seen. Actually, last night I saw something strange. I told her about the moving light in the woods. Her face paled slightly. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you. It was probably nothing. Nothing doesn't move through woods at 3 a.m., Liam. That evening, our relaxed mood had evaporated. We kept the exterior lights on and the interior ones dimmed. Every unexpected sound from the woods made us exchange glances. After dinner, Emma suggested we watch a movie on my laptop, needing the distraction. Halfway through the film, a notification appeared on my screen, a new email. Somehow, despite having no cell service, the cabin's Wi-Fi was working. The email was from Airbnb. How's your stay at Mountain Vista Lodge? I clicked on it, intending to mention the surprise visit from Richard. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the booking details, the host's name was listed as Margaret Winters, not Richard. Emma, I said slowly, who did we rent this cabin from? She looked confused. Richard Cavendish. Why? I turned the screen toward her. According to Airbnb, our host is someone named Margaret Winters. That's weird. Maybe Richard manages it for her? Maybe. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Richard Cavendish Vermont Property Manager. No relevant results. I tried Cavendish Properties Vermont. Still nothing. Try the address, Emma suggested, her voice tense. But we realized we didn't actually know the proper address. The directions had been landmarks and distances. I tried Mountain Vista Lodge, Vermont, and got several hits, but none matching our location. This doesn't make sense, I said, feeling increasingly uneasy. Emma took the laptop and logged into her email, finding the original booking confirmation. Here, the property is listed as 17 Blackwood Road. Try that. I searched for the address and found a real estate listing from 3 years earlier. The photos matched our cabin, but the description read, former rental property being sold as is following unfortunate incidents. Price to sell quickly. What incidents? Emma asked, reading over my shoulder. I clicked through to the realtor site but found the listing had been removed. A chill ran down my spine as I realized we were staying in a house with an unknown history, rented from someone using a false identity. We should leave, Emma whispered. First thing tomorrow. I nodded, but before I could respond, the Wi-Fi connection dropped. The browser showed an error message. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees around the cabin. And then, in the distance, we saw it again. A faint light moving among the trees, coming closer. Do you see that? Emma gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. I see it. The light bobbed between trees, approaching the cabin from the direction of the pond. Get your phone. Take a video. She fumbled for her phone while I moved to turn off the living room lights, hoping to see better into the darkness. As the room went dark, the windows became clearer portals to the night outside. The light was definitely moving with purpose, not the random motion of an animal. It's a person, Emma whispered beside me, her phone recording. Someone's out there. I squinted, trying to make out details. The light illuminated a path about 50 yards from the cabin, moving parallel to the property line. Occasionally, it would stop and turn toward the cabin, as if checking on us. Maybe it's a neighbor, I suggested, my voice betraying my doubt. At 10 p.m., walking through dense woods? Emma shook her head. No way. We watched, frozen, as the light completed its circuit around the cabin and then retreated in the direction it had come from. Only when it disappeared entirely did I realize I'd been holding my breath. I'm calling the police, Emma said, already dialing. There's no service, remember? She cursed as her call failed to connect. The landline. Check if there's a landline. I searched the cabin but found no phone. Of course not. Who would install a landline in a modern Airbnb? I returned to find Emma throwing clothes into her suitcase. What are you doing? Packing. We're leaving. It's pitch black out there, and the road down the mountain is all switchbacks. We should wait until morning. She paused, conflicted. I could see her weighing the fear of staying against the danger of navigating unfamiliar mountain roads in darkness. First light, then, she finally agreed. But we're sleeping in shifts. I don't trust whoever is out there. I nodded, relieved she wasn't insisting we leave immediately. We finished packing in tense silence, leaving out only what we'd need for the night and early morning. I volunteered to take the first watch while Emma tried to sleep. Sitting in the dark living room, I kept my eyes on the windows and the woods beyond. The partial moon cast silver light on the clearing around the cabin, but the forest remained impenetrably dark. Several times I thought I saw movement, but nothing definitive. Around 2 a.m. I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. The distinct creak of a floorboard on the deck. Someone was outside the cabin, very close. I remained perfectly still, afraid even the slightest movement would be visible to whoever was out there. For nearly 20 minutes, I heard occasional soft sounds, footsteps circling the cabin, pausing at windows. I imagined someone peering in, watching us. When the noises finally retreated, I rushed upstairs to wake Emma. Someone was on the deck, I whispered urgently. We need to block the doors. Together, we pushed furniture against both the front and deck doors. It wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but it would make enough noise to alert us. I gave Emma the chef's knife from the kitchen, the closest thing to a weapon we had, and kept a heavy flashlight for myself. Your turn to rest, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll wake you if anything happens. I lay down on the couch, certain I wouldn't sleep, but exhaustion overcame fear. Emma shook me awake as gray dawn light filtered through the windows. Time to go, she said. Her face was pale with fatigue, but her eyes were alert. Did you see anything? I asked, sitting up. She hesitated. Not exactly, but around 4 a.m., all the motion-activated exterior lights came on at once, like something triggered them simultaneously from all sides. A chill ran through me. All sides? That would take multiple people. She nodded grimly. Let's go, now. We moved the furniture and carried our bags to the car. The morning was eerily quiet. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just silence. I kept expecting someone to emerge from the trees, but we made it to the car without incident. My hands shook as I tried to put the key in the ignition. The car started on the first try, and I felt a flood of relief. We would be okay. We just needed to get down the mountain, back to civilization and cell service. As I turned the car around in the driveway, Emma gasped. I followed her gaze to the cabin's entrance. Standing in the open doorway was a man I didn't recognize, tall, middle-aged, with a caretaker's weathered face. He raised his hand in greeting, as casual as if we were neighbors departing after a visit. Who is that? Emma whispered. I don't know. I accelerated down the driveway, gravel spraying beneath our tires. In the rearview mirror, I could see the man still standing there, watching us leave. We didn't speak until we reached the main road, both processing what had happened. Finally, as we approached a small town and my phone chimed with returning service, Emma broke the silence. Call Airbnb. Report everything. I nodded and pulled into a diner parking lot. As Emma went inside to order coffee, I made the call. The customer service representative sounded concerned as I explained our experience, promising to investigate immediately. Can you tell me anything about the property or the host? I asked. Let me see. Oh, her voice changed. Sir, we don't have any listing at that address in our system. Are you sure you booked through Airbnb? My blood ran cold. Check my account. The reservation should be there, under Mountain Vista Lodge. I'm looking at your account now, sir. Your last booking was in June, for a Boston property. I sat in stunned silence as the representative asked if I still had confirmation emails or payment records. I did, but according to her, they weren't from Airbnb's official domains. Inside the diner, I showed Emma the emails on my phone. The addresses looked legitimate at first glance, but upon closer inspection, contained subtle misspellings. "We were scammed," I said, the realization dawning. "The listing, the reviews, all fake." Emma's hands trembled around her coffee mug. But the house was real. Someone was watching us. Who were they? What did they want? I had no answers. Later that day, we filed a police report. The officers exchanged glances when we mentioned the address, 17 Blackwood Road. "That property has a history," one finally said. "Previous renters reported similar experiences. Someone watches the house, walks the perimeter. Nothing ever happens beyond that." "Someone's just watching?" Emma asked, incredulously. The officer nodded. "Far as we can tell, we've patrolled up there, found evidence of trespassing, but never caught anyone. The property changes hands frequently. Current owner lives out of state, probably has no idea." "And Richard Cavendish?" I asked. "No record of anyone by that name associated with the property." As we drove back to Boston that evening, I couldn't shake the image of the man in the doorway. Who was he? What was his purpose? The questions haunted me more than any answer could. 1 month later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Missing you at 17 Blackwood." The email contained no text, just a photo attachment. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was a picture of Emma and me, asleep in the cabin's bed, taken from inside the room. I deleted the email and blocked the sender. We never spoke of the cabin again, but sometimes I still wake in the night with the certainty that someone is standing at our bedroom window, watching. And in those moments, I know with absolute certainty that whoever was at the cabin is still out there, still watching, perhaps even closer than we think. That's the true horror I live with now, not knowing when the watching will end and what might come after. The trail to Echo Mountain wasn't on any official hiking maps. I discovered it through a hiking forum where users shared hidden gems across the Pacific Northwest. A user called Alpine Wanderer had posted coordinates and a brief description. For experienced hikers only. Pristine wilderness, challenging terrain, incomparable views. No rangers, no tourists, just you and the mountain. The photos showed misty peaks and valleys untouched by civilization, exactly what I was looking for. After my divorce was finalized, I needed to get away. 6 years of marriage dissolved into paperwork and polite nods across a conference table. The legal process had drained me, but the emptiness that followed was worse. I'd lost myself somewhere along the way, becoming someone I barely recognized. The mountains had always been my refuge, the place where I felt most alive. So when I found this trail, it seemed like the universe was offering exactly what I needed: solitude, challenge, and the chance to remember who I was. I'd been hiking solo for years before meeting Amanda. She had never understood my need for these wilderness excursions, viewing them as unnecessarily risky. "Why go alone?" she'd ask. "What if something happens?" I never had a satisfactory answer for her. How could I explain that the solitude was precisely the point? That sometimes I needed to strip away all the noise of everyday life and face the raw elements alone? After packing my gear methodically, tent, sleeping bag rated for freezing temperatures, water purification system, first aid kit, satellite phone, and provisions for 5 days, I drove 8 hours from Seattle to the small town of Blackridge. The place had seen better days. Boarded-up storefronts lined the main street, and the few locals I encountered at the gas station eyed me with thinly veiled suspicion. Heading up to the mountains? the cashier asked as I paid for an extra canister of fuel. Yeah, planning to spend a few days hiking. Which trail? I hesitated, protective of my secret spot. Just exploring around Echo Mountain. Something flickered across his weathered face. Echo Mountain? Don't know any trails up there open to the public. Oh, I must have the name wrong? I replied casually, not wanting to admit I was planning to hike an unofficial trail. He studied me for a moment. Weather's supposed to turn. Might want to check the forecast before heading out. I thanked him for the advice and left, brushing off his concern. The forecast I'd checked showed clear skies for the next week. Small-town locals often tried to scare off outsiders with tales of dangerous weather. I'd encountered this protective attitude before. I parked my car at what appeared to be an abandoned Forest Service road, double-checking the coordinates. According to Alpine Wanderer's instructions, the trail began about half a mile up this overgrown road. Shouldering my pack, which felt reassuringly heavy, I started walking. The road was more degraded than I'd expected, with saplings growing through cracks in the pavement. Nature was reclaiming this place rapidly. After about 20 minutes, I spotted the marker Alpine Wanderer had described. 3 stacked stones beside a barely visible path leading into dense forest. As I stepped onto the trail, the sounds of the world seemed to drop away. The forest enveloped me in its green silence, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the soft rustle of leaves. The path was faint but discernible, winding through towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting patterns, and the air smelled of pine and earth. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen. This was exactly what I needed. The trail grew steadily steeper as the afternoon progressed. According to my map, I'd need to reach the first plateau by nightfall to stay on schedule. The exertion felt good, my muscles warming to the familiar rhythm of ascent. I stopped occasionally to drink water and check my location on the GPS device. Around 4 p.m., I reached the plateau, a relatively flat area with a small clearing suitable for camping. As I set up my tent, I noticed stone fragments scattered around the site. They appeared to be remnants of some structure, too deliberate to be natural, but too degraded to identify. Perhaps an old Forest Service cabin or a miner's shelter from the area's gold rush days. After securing my food in a bear canister and hanging it from a tree away from my campsite, I boiled water for my dehydrated dinner. As darkness fell, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no rustling of nocturnal animals, just silence. I'd experienced this phenomenon before in high alpine settings. Sometimes the conditions weren't right for much wildlife. Still, something about the quality of this silence felt different. More complete, more attentive. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, exhaustion overtook me quickly. Just before drifting off, I thought I heard something, a sound like distant voices, too faint to make out words. A group of campers elsewhere on the mountain, perhaps. The thought was oddly comforting as I fell into a dreamless sleep. I woke to the sound of rain pattering against my tent. A quick check of my watch showed it was just after 5 a.m. The sky outside still dark. So much for the clear forecast. I retrieved my satellite phone to check for updated weather information, but the device showed no signal. Unusual, but not unheard of in mountainous terrain. I'd try again from higher ground. The rain lightened as dawn broke, settling into a fine mist that hung between the trees. I packed efficiently, had a quick breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, and was back on the trail by 7. The second day's hike would take me through what Alpine Wanderer had described as the Passage, a narrow ravine between 2 ridges. The path grew less distinct as I climbed higher, requiring more attention to navigation. The mist thickened, limiting visibility to about 30 feet ahead. I relied increasingly on my GPS, which thankfully continued to function, even though the satellite phone didn't. Around midday, I reached the entrance to the ravine. Two sheer rock faces rose on either side, creating a natural corridor about 15 feet wide. The path through it was rocky and uneven, water dripping from above. As I entered the passage, I felt a subtle change in air pressure, as if I were walking into a cave. The acoustics inside the ravine were strange. My footsteps echoed oddly, sometimes seeming to return from ahead rather than behind. Twice I stopped, certain I'd heard someone else moving, only to realize it was my own sounds playing tricks on me. I'd experienced similar acoustic phenomena in canyons before, but this felt different, more disorienting. Halfway through the passage, I discovered a recess in the rock wall that extended into a shallow cave. Seeking shelter from the persistent mist, I decided to take my lunch break there. As I sat eating trail mix and jerky, I noticed markings on the cave wall, crude symbols carved into the stone. Some resembled stick figures, others looked like rudimentary maps or astronomical signs. They were weathered, certainly old, but how old I couldn't determine. I photographed the symbols with my phone, making a mental note to research them later. Native American petroglyphs, most likely, though I wasn't aware of any documented sites in this specific area. Back on the trail, the passage gradually widened until it opened onto another plateau. This one larger and craggier than the first. The mist had cleared somewhat, allowing glimpses of the valley below and the peaks above. I was making good time despite the weather. As I crossed the plateau, I noticed more stone ruins, clearly foundations of structures arranged in a rough circle. In the center stood a single column of stacked stones about 4 feet high. It looked like an ancient cairn, but something about its construction struck me as odd. The stones fit together too perfectly, with barely visible seams between them. I circled the cairn, examining it from all angles. No markings or inscriptions were visible. Curious, I reached out to touch it, and immediately withdrew my hand. The stone was warm, not sun-warmed. There had been no sun today, but radiating heat from within, as if housing some internal energy source. I backed away, suddenly uneasy. There had to be a natural explanation. Geothermal activity, perhaps, but something about the precision of the structure, combined with the unexpected warmth, triggered a primal wariness. Setting up camp at the edge of the plateau, I kept glancing back at the circle of ruins. As twilight descended, I could have sworn the central cairn was faintly luminous, though when I approached to check, it appeared normal. Just a trick of the fading light and my overactive imagination. That night, the silence was again absolute. No wind, no animals, just the occasional drip of moisture from tree branches. I lay awake longer than I wanted to, listening to the nothing. When sleep finally came, it brought vivid dreams of being led through dark forests by shadowy figures who always remained just ahead, out of clear sight. I woke several times, disoriented, convinced I'd heard my name called from outside the tent. Each time I listened intently, there was only silence. By morning, I felt unrested and on edge, attributing my unease to the strange acoustics of the mountain and my own solitude. The weather cleared as I broke camp, revealing blue skies and spectacular views. Echo Mountain summit was now clearly visible, perhaps 5 hours of hiking away. My spirits lifted with the clouds. Today I would reach the summit, and these odd experiences would make for good stories once I returned to civilization. The trail to the summit was the most challenging yet, alternating between steep rocky sections that required careful hand-over-hand climbing and deceptively easy plateaus. The tree line gradually gave way to alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers and stunted pines shaped by constant wind. Despite the physical demands, I felt strong and focused. This was what I had come for, the elemental challenge of matching myself against the mountain, with no one to rely on but myself. Each successful navigation of a difficult passage brought a surge of satisfaction. This was who I was, who I had been before years of compromise and accommodation had dulled my edges. Around noon, I paused on an outcropping to eat and take in the vista. The world below was a patchwork of forests, valleys, and distant silver threads of rivers. No roads were visible from this vantage point, no buildings or power lines, just wilderness extending to the horizon. I felt both insignificant and expansive in the face of such grandeur. As I was repacking my bag, I noticed something odd. A flash of color among the rocks about 50 yards away. Something blue, too vivid to be natural in this environment. Curious, I made my way over. It was a backpack. A high-end model, nearly identical to my own, wedged between two boulders. My first thought was that another hiker had temporarily left their gear while summiting with a lighter load. But as I examined the pack more closely, I saw it was weather damaged. The once bright blue fabric faded unevenly from prolonged sun exposure. I hesitated, then unzipped the main compartment. Inside were standard hiking supplies: a water filter, tattered map, energy bars now hard as rocks, a first aid kit, and a small journal. The ethical thing would be to leave the pack for its owner to retrieve, but the condition of the contents suggested it had been here for months, if not longer. Someone might be missing. With that justification, I opened the journal. The first entries were typical hiking observations. Notes about trail conditions, wildlife sightings, weather. The handwriting was neat, precise, suggesting a methodical mind. The hiker, who signed entries with just the initial M, had followed the same route I was on, also having discovered it through online forums. About halfway through, the entries changed. M began describing acoustic anomalies in the ravine, identical to what I had experienced. Later entries mentioned ruins, the circular stone foundations, the central cairn. M had also noted its unusual warmth. The final entries became increasingly disjointed. M wrote about voices in the silence, about feeling watched, about dreams of being led through the forest. The last entry was dated nearly a year ago. Day 4, summit today. But something is wrong with this place. The silence follows me now, even when there should be wind or birds. Last night the voices were clearer. They know my name. They're in my head, but also in the air around me. I keep seeing movement at the corner of my vision, but when I turn, nothing's there. The cairn is the key. I'm going to examine it more closely after I summit. If anyone finds this journal, Echo Mountain echoes back. A chill ran through me despite the warm sun. I looked around, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The pack's presence confirmed that at least one other person had hiked this route, and apparently hadn't returned to claim their gear. I took a photo of the journal's final page, then replaced it and re-zipped the backpack, leaving it exactly as I'd found it. I should report it once I had cell service again. Someone named M might be missing, their family waiting for answers. The encounter had unsettled me, but I reminded myself that solo hikers sometimes abandon gear for various reasons. M might have exited the mountain by a different route, been unable to relocate their pack, or simply been dramatic in their journaling. Still, as I continued toward the summit, I found myself more alert, more aware of my surroundings. The silence that had seemed peaceful now felt watchful. Several times I paused, convinced someone was behind me, only to find empty trail. I reached the summit around 4 p.m., a rocky outcrop offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. A pile of stones marked the highest point, a traditional summit cairn left by previous hikers. It looked ordinary, unlike the precision-crafted column on the plateau below. After taking the obligatory summit photos and signing the weatherproof register stored in a metal box, noting with unease that the previous entry was nearly a year old, signed simply M, I began to set up my tent in a sheltered spot just below the peak. The plan was to spend the night at the summit, then begin my descent in the morning. As I secured my tent against the wind that had finally picked up, I noticed something glinting among the rocks about 100 yards down the ridge. Leaving my half-assembled tent, I went to investigate. It was a satellite phone, the same model as mine. Weathered, its case cracked, but potentially still functional. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and felt my stomach drop. Scratched into the back were initials, MJ. I stood frozen, phone in hand, as the implications washed over me. M had reached the summit. M had carried a satellite phone just as I did. And M had apparently left both backpack and phone on the mountain. The wind suddenly gusted, carrying with it a sound I could have sworn was my name, whispered just at the edge of hearing. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw only empty ridgeline and approaching dusk. I needed to get off this mountain. Now. Summit or no summit? Something was wrong here. Hurriedly, I packed up my half-assembled tent, strapped on my headlamp as the light was already fading, and began moving downward as quickly as safety allowed. I'd hike through the night if necessary, using the nearly full moon and my headlamp for guidance. The rational part of my mind argued I was overreacting to coincidence and isolation, but a deeper instinct urged retreat. As darkness fell completely, I reached the plateau with the ruins. In the beam of my headlamp, the central cairn seemed to pulse with faint luminescence. Imagined or real, I didn't stop to investigate. I skirted the ruins and continued downward, into the forest that had seemed so welcoming just days before. That's when I heard them clearly for the first time. Voices in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my light. The voices were indistinct at first, like radio static resolving into speech. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped, switching off my headlamp to better locate the source. The forest plunged into darkness, moonlight filtering weakly through the canopy. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin and foreign. "Is someone there?" The voices ceased immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to reach my ears. Then, directly behind me, a voice spoke with perfect clarity. "We've been waiting for you, Jason." I whirled around, heart hammering against my ribs. My name. They'd used my name. But there was no one there, just shadows and trees. Fumbling, I switched my headlamp back on, its beam cutting through darkness to illuminate empty forest. I was alone. I had to be alone. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite my rising panic. "Identify yourself." No response came, but as I stood listening, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows shifting independently of my light's movement. When I turned to face them directly, they disappeared. I needed to keep moving. Standing still made me an easy target for whatever was happening. Hallucinations from altitude sickness? Some kind of toxic plant I'd inadvertently touched? Or was I simply succumbing to the power of suggestion after reading M's journal? Forcing myself to breathe steadily, I continued down the trail, moving as quickly as I dared in the darkness. My headlamp created a tunnel of visibility surrounded by absolute blackness. Every few minutes, I'd catch glimpses of movement just outside my light's reach. Once, I distinctly saw a human silhouette step behind a tree. "I see you," I shouted, surprising myself with my boldness. "Stop following me." My words echoed back to me, distorted. "Stop following. Following us?" Us? Had I said us? I broke into a jog where the trail allowed, no longer concerned with conserving energy. Fear propelled me forward, down toward the ravine that I'd have to pass through to reach safety. The memory of its strange acoustics now filled me with dread. As I approached the ravine entrance, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The cairn, The same precisely constructed column of stones I'd observed on the plateau above stood at the entrance. It hadn't been there before. I was certain of it, and it was glowing, not reflecting my headlamp's beam, but emitting a faint bluish light of its own. I stood paralyzed, options racing through my mind. The only way down the mountain was through the ravine. I could try to climb around, but in the dark, that would be suicidal. I had to go through. As I neared the cairn, the air grew noticeably warmer. The stones hummed with barely audible vibration. Against my better judgment, I reached out and touched it. Images flooded my mind, the mountain seen through different eyes, in different seasons, in different centuries. People hiking as I had, drawn by the same isolation and beauty. And then, staying, becoming part of something, echoing. I jerked my hand away, gasping. The cairn's glow intensified momentarily, then faded back to its steady luminescence. The voice came again from just behind my right shoulder. "We are the mountain's echo, Jason. Each of us who answered its call." I spun around and, for the first time, saw them clearly. Translucent figures, a dozen or more, standing in a loose circle around me. Men and women of various ages, dressed in hiking clothes from different eras. Their features were indistinct, like photographs slightly out of focus, but their eyes were sharp and present. Among them stood a man about my age, wearing modern hiking gear similar to mine. On his backpack was a small tag with MJ written on it. "Michael Jensen," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You found my journal, my phone. What is this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's happening?" Echo Mountain has many names, a woman in antiquated hiking clothes from perhaps the 1950s said, but its nature remains constant. It draws those who seek solitude, who run from connection. It offers an alternative. Michael stepped forward. Unlike the others, he seemed more solid, more recently, whatever they had become. "I was like you," he said. Divorce, identity crisis, seeking answers in isolation. But the mountain showed me a paradox, that true connection comes from surrendering the self. "We echo here," an older man added. "Our experiences, our consciousness, our being, reverberating through time and space, never alone again." I backed away, but found myself against the cairn. Its warmth seeped through my clothes. "You're dead," I whispered, "all of you." Michael smiled sadly. "Not dead, transformed. The mountain doesn't take life, it extends it, reshapes it. We exist in the silence between heartbeats, in the space between thoughts." "I don't want this," I said, finding strength in my terror. "I want to leave." "Of course you can leave," the woman said. "We're not captors. The mountain invites, it doesn't imprison." "But you'll come back," Michael added with certainty, "because you've heard the echo now, and part of you, the part that's been lonely and adrift since long before your divorce, recognizes its voice." I pushed past them, their forms parting like mist, and ran into the ravine. Their voices followed me, overlapping in a chorus that bounced from wall to wall. "We'll be waiting. The mountain remembers. Echo calls to echo. You've already begun to change." The acoustics of the ravine amplified their words, surrounding me with sound that seemed to penetrate my very being. I ran blindly, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly across rock walls, until I emerged on the other side, gasping for breath. Looking back, I saw no pursuers, just darkness and the faint glow of the cairn at the ravine's entrance. But the silence had followed me, that particular quality of attentive emptiness that I now recognized as their presence. I didn't stop until I reached my first night's campsite. Exhausted, I collapsed beside the remnants of my previous fire. Despite my fear, I needed rest. I would continue at first light, get off this mountain, and never return. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, their words continued to echo in my mind, "You've already begun to change." I woke to sunlight and perfect silence. For a moment I lay still, trying to sort reality from nightmare. The events in the ravine seemed impossible in the clarifying light of morning. I had been exhausted, suggestible after reading Michael's journal. My mind had constructed a scenario that explained the abandoned gear while playing on my deepest fears and insecurities. Still, I packed quickly and set off down the final stretch of trail, eager to reach my car and return to civilization. The forest seemed normal now. Birds called overhead, small creatures rustled in the underbrush. I began to breathe more easily as the trail descended. About a mile from where I'd parked, I encountered another hiker coming up, a woman in her 30s with professional-looking gear and a confident stride. "Morning," she called cheerfully. "Heading down?" The sound of another human voice, a normal, present, undeniably real human voice, nearly brought me to tears with relief. "Yes," I managed. "You're heading up? To Echo Mountain?" She nodded. "Solo trip. Need to clear my head after, well, life stuff." I hesitated. Should I warn her? Tell her about the cairns, the voices, the figures in the darkness? Would she think I was insane, or possibly trying to scare her off for some nefarious purpose? "Be careful up there," I said finally. "The trail gets tricky in places, and there's a strange acoustic phenomenon in the ravine. Can play tricks on your mind when you're alone." She smiled. "I've done solo hiking for years, but thanks for the concern." We wished each other well and continued in opposite directions. I looked back once to see her rounding a bend, heading up toward whatever waited on Echo Mountain. Had I done enough? Should I have been more explicit? But what if last night had been nothing more than exhaustion and an overstressed mind? I reached my car without further incident, threw my pack in the trunk, and sat behind the wheel, savoring the familiar normality. As I started the engine, I felt a weight lifting. Whatever had happened, real or imagined, was behind me now. The drive back to Seattle was uneventful. I stopped only for gas and coffee, eager to put distance between myself and Echo Mountain. By evening, I was back in my apartment, showered and scrolling through news I'd missed during my offline days. That night, I slept deeply and without dreams. The next morning, I felt refreshed, the hiking trip already taking on the quality of an intense but fading dream. I spent the day catching up on emails, paying bills, easing back into ordinary life. It was only when night fell again that I noticed it, the silence. That distinctive, attentive silence that I'd experienced on the mountain. My apartment, normally filled with the ambient sounds of the city, had become unnaturally quiet. I turned on the television for background noise, but even with the volume up, the sound seemed muffled, distant. I opened a window. No traffic noise rose from the street below. "No," I said aloud. "This isn't happening." "It already has," came a whispered response from the empty room behind me. I spun around. No one was there, but the quality of emptiness had changed. The apartment felt occupied by absence, if such a contradiction could exist. Over the next few days, the phenomenon continued. The silence would come and go. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of figures at the edge of my vision. Occasionally, I'd hear my name whispered when no one was near. I stopped sleeping, spent money I didn't have on hotel rooms, but the silence followed me. A week after my return, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. echomountain@redacted.com. The message contained only GPS coordinates, the same coordinates I'd followed to find the trail, and 4 words. "We're still waiting, Jason." I deleted it immediately, but moments later my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "The mountain remembers. Echo calls to Echo." That night, unable to bear the silence and the whispers any longer, I began researching Echo Mountain more thoroughly than I had before my trip. What I found chilled me to the bone. Local indigenous legends spoke of a place where the world grows thin, where those who sought solitude might find the ultimate communion. Early settlers had recorded stories of hikers who returned from certain mountains changed, speaking of conversations with people who weren't there. More recently, I found missing persons reports. Not many, perhaps one every few years, but with similarities that couldn't be coincidental. People like me, often recently divorced or otherwise disconnected, who went hiking alone and never returned. Michael Jensen was among them, reported missing 11 months ago. As I dug deeper, I found an obscure academic paper discussing Echo Mountain Syndrome, a rare psychological condition where hikers became convinced they were being followed or spoken to by invisible presences. The paper attributed it to a combination of isolation, unusual acoustic properties in the terrain, and possibly low-level hallucinogens present in certain fungi that grew in the area. A rational explanation, a comforting one, but it didn't account for the silence that had followed me home, the whispers in empty rooms, the way my own thoughts sometimes seemed to echo back to me in voices not my own. 3 weeks after my return, I received a package. No return address, postmarked from Blackridge. Inside was a small stone, unremarkable except for its perfect fit against my palm and the faint warmth it radiated. Wrapped around it was a note in handwriting I recognized from the journal. Some echoes need to be completed. That night, the whispers were clearer than ever. You're changing, Jason. Fighting it only makes it harder. We're with you now, part of you. Your echo has already begun to reverberate with ours. I haven't slept in days. The silence is constant now. The figures no longer hide at the edges of my vision, but stand openly in my apartment. Michael, the woman in vintage hiking clothes, others I don't recognize but somehow know. They watch me with patient expressions, waiting. I've booked a flight back to Washington. I'll rent a car, drive to Blackridge, hike up Echo Mountain one more time. Not to escape the echoes, but to understand them. To complete whatever began when I first set foot on that trail. If you're reading this, it means I left this account on my laptop, set to post automatically if I don't return in 7 days. It means I've made my choice. Don't come looking for me. But if you're ever hiking in the Pacific Northwest and find yourself drawn to unmarked trails, to places of perfect silence, listen carefully. In the space between your heartbeats, in the pause between your thoughts, you might hear us. We'll be waiting. The mountain remembers. Echo calls to echo. I've always been drawn to forgotten places, the ones people leave behind when the shine wears off and the next big thing comes along. That's what brought me to Wonderland Park that autumn afternoon. Once the crown jewel of Cedar Creek, Iowa, now just 40 acres of decaying dreams on the outskirts of town. My camera hung heavy around my neck as I approached the rusted gates. Urban exploration had been my hobby for years, but something about this place felt different. The faded sign still clung to the arch above, where wonder never ends. A cruel joke now, considering the park had been abandoned for 15 years after that tragic summer of 2010. I slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. Dead leaves crunched beneath my boots, the only sound besides the occasional groan of metal structures swaying in the wind. The entrance plaza lay before me, ticket booths with shattered windows, their cash registers long gone. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had built. I'd researched Wonderland before coming. Opened in 1978, it had been the passion project of local businessman Thomas Hargrove, who wanted to create a magical place for families that wasn't a 6-hour drive to the bigger parks. For 3 decades, it thrived until financial troubles and that terrible accident forced its closure. What struck me most was the eerie stillness. Amusement parks should be full of noise, children's laughter, the mechanical whir of rides, carnival music. The silence felt wrong, like walking through a photograph of something that once lived and breathed. I raised my camera and captured the faded mural on the Welcome Center. Cartoon characters with chipped paint smiles that now looked more menacing than inviting. As the sun began its descent, shadows stretched across the grounds like elongated fingers. I should have waited until morning to explore, but something compelled me forward. I had to see more before darkness fell. The midway stretched before me like the spine of a massive skeleton. Game booths lined both sides, their awnings tattered and collapsed in places. Stuffed animals, once prizes to be won, lay scattered and rotting, their synthetic fur matted with years of rain and decay. I approached one booth, the ring toss, and ran my finger along the counter, leaving a trail in the thick dust. In one corner, I found a stack of employee handbooks. The pages were warped from moisture, but I could still make out the cheery instructions. Remember, a Wonderland employee always wears a smile. I pocketed one from my collection. My flashlight beam caught something moving ahead, just a raccoon scurrying away from my intrusion. Wildlife had made this place their domain now, evident from the bird nests in the concession stands and the occasional droppings on the walkways. I passed what had once been the arcade, its windows boarded up. Through a narrow gap, I could see the silhouettes of abandoned game cabinets, standing like tombstones. Someone had broken in at some point. Graffiti marked the walls with cryptic messages and crude drawings. One phrase stood out: "Tommy still watches." I assumed it referred to Thomas Hargrove, though he died shortly after the park closed. The food court was particularly unsettling. Plastic chairs overturned, menus still displaying prices for corn dogs and funnel cakes frozen in time. On one table, I found a child's plastic bracelet, the kind they give out at park entrances. The name Lily was still legible on its faded surface. I was about to move on when I heard it, the faint, tinny notes of a carousel. My heart lurched in my chest. It couldn't be. There was no power in this place. Yet the melody lingered, distant and distorted, like it was struggling to reach me through the years. I turned slowly, trying to locate its source. The sun had nearly disappeared now, casting everything in a twilight glow that made distances difficult to judge. The music stopped abruptly. Silence again, but heavier somehow. I convinced myself it had been the wind playing tricks, moving something that produced those notes. Yet as I continued through the midway toward the ride section, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't exploring this place. It was revealing itself to me. The centerpiece of Wonderland Park had been its collection of rides. Not the biggest or most thrilling in the country, but charming in their mid-century design. The Ferris wheel stood tallest, its 30 gondolas frozen in their eternal circle. Vines had begun to climb the metal structure, nature's slow reclamation. I took several photos, capturing how the setting sun filtered through its skeletal frame. To my left was the tilt-a-whirl, its cars partially derailed and covered in bird droppings. The control booth's window was smashed, exposing the rusty levers and buttons that once brought it to life. Someone had spray-painted "Death Trap" across its side, perhaps a local teenager's idea of a joke, though the words seemed prophetic in this setting. I approached the wooden roller coaster that had been Wonderland's star attraction. The Thunderbolt. Its structure still dominated the landscape, though sections had collapsed over the years. The tracks climbed and dipped like the spine of some prehistoric beast. According to my research, the Thunderbolt had been Hargrove's pride and joy, designed by one of the top coaster architects of the 1970s. The queue area remained intact, switchback railings guiding invisible lines of excited visitors who would never come again. Faded warning signs still hung, You must be this tall to ride and secure all loose articles. I found myself stepping into the queue line, following its path as if waiting my turn. The sensation was disorienting, like briefly slipping into another time. At the loading platform, a single coaster car remained, its red paint peeling to reveal the metal underneath. The safety bars were locked in the down position, as if securing phantom passengers. I ran my hand along its side, feeling the weathered surface beneath my fingers. That's when I noticed the employee break room hidden behind the ride. Its door hung ajar, and curiosity pulled me inside. The room was small, just a table, some lockers, and a bulletin board still covered with notices and schedules from the park's final season. Employee of the Month photos featured smiling teenagers in their red and gold Wonderland uniforms. My flashlight beam swept across the table and caught something unexpected. A logbook, still open, as if the last person had stepped away momentarily instead of 15 years ago. The final entry was dated July 16th, 2010, 2 days before the accident. The handwriting was hurried. Maintenance requested again for car Mer 7. Braking system still sticking. TH says wait until end of month shutdown. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Car number 7 was the one that had failed during that fateful ride, sending 5 passengers to the hospital and killing a 12-year-old boy. The official investigation had cited unavoidable mechanical failure, but this suggested something else entirely. As I photographed the logbook, the daylight outside faded completely. I was now dependent on my flashlight, its beam creating strange, shifting shadows as I moved. And then, from somewhere deeper in the park, I heard what sounded like laughter, distant, childlike, and completely out of place in this abandoned world. I should have left when darkness fell. Any experienced urban explorer knows that abandoned places transform at night, becoming treacherous in ways that go beyond physical danger. But that sound, that laughter, pulled me forward like an invisible thread. I followed it past the dead bumper cars and the log flume with its stagnant, leaf-filled channel. The beam of my flashlight bounced erratically as I walked faster, casting bizarre shadows that seemed to move independently of the objects creating them. The laughter grew louder as I approached what had been Wonderland's central plaza. And there it was, the Grand Carousel, the park's oldest attraction. Unlike the other rides that showed obvious decay, the carousel looked almost preserved. Its canopy remained intact, protecting the carved animals beneath from the worst of the elements. Horses, lions, and mythical creatures stood frozen in their eternal race, their painted eyes staring into the darkness. I circled it slowly, my flashlight illuminating each figure in turn. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Each animal hand-carved with meticulous detail, their expressions startlingly lifelike. One horse in particular caught my attention. Unlike the others with their happy, carnival-appropriate designs, this one's face seemed contorted in something like fear. Its eyes were wide, nostrils flared, teeth bared. I reached out to touch its mane when the laughter came again, this time directly behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering. The beam of my flashlight cut through empty air. "Hello?" My voice echoed off the silent rides. "Is someone else here?" No response. But as I turned back to the carousel, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small plaque on the center column, partially obscured by dust. I wiped it clean with my sleeve and read the inscription. "In loving memory of Timothy Hargrove, 1998 to 2010. May your laughter echo forever." The son? Thomas Hargrove's son had been the child killed in the accident. I'd read about the boy in news articles, but hadn't realized the personal connection to the owner. Suddenly, the park's rapid closure made more sense. How could Hargrove continue operating it after losing his child to one of his own rides? As I contemplated this, something impossible happened. The carousel's lights flickered on, just for a moment, illuminating the entire plaza in a brief, golden glow before darkness returned. I stumbled backward, knocking into one of the carved horses. It wasn't possible. The power had been cut years ago. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice noticeably shaking now. "This isn't funny," a small voice answered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "But Daddy said Wonderland is always supposed to be funny." My blood turned to ice. I swept my flashlight in a frantic arc, searching for the source. Nothing. Just the eerie stillness of abandoned attractions. Then I saw it. A small figure standing by the entrance to the Thunderbolt, barely visible in the darkness. A child, or what appeared to be a child, wearing what looked like the red and gold uniform of Wonderland staff. Before I could process what I was seeing, the figure turned and ran toward the roller coaster. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I followed. The service entrance to the Thunderbolt was unlocked, its door swinging gently in the night breeze. I hesitated at the threshold, my flashlight beam revealing a narrow staircase leading up to the coaster's mechanical room. Common sense screamed at me to turn around, to leave this place and its ghosts, real or imagined, behind. But the journalist in me, the part that had always needed to know the truth, pushed me forward. The steps creaked ominously under my weight as I climbed. Cobwebs brushed against my face, and the air grew noticeably colder. At the top landing, a heavy door stood partially open. Light spilled from inside. Not my flashlight, but a warm, yellow glow that shouldn't exist in this powerless place. I pushed the door open fully, revealing a room filled with control panels, maintenance logs, and diagnostic equipment. And sitting at the central console, his back to me, was a man in a Wonderland management uniform. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper. The figure didn't turn, but I heard him speak clearly. I told him it wasn't ready. Told him car number 7 needed the new brake assembly. His voice was tired, heavy with regret. But the summer crowd was the biggest we'd had in years. Couldn't afford to shut down our star attraction on a holiday weekend. That's what Thomas said. I remained frozen in the doorway, unable to retreat, unable to approach. His own son, the man continued, shaking his head slowly. He put his own son in car number 7, said it would show everyone it was safe. My mind raced to the articles I'd read. Timothy Hargrove had indeed been riding in car number 7, along with 4 other passengers. The official story claimed Thomas had been devastated, a father who lost his child to a tragic accident. But this suggested something far more sinister. Negligence at best. Manslaughter at worst. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. The figure slowly turned, and I had to stifle a scream. His face was normal enough, middle-aged, tired-looking, but transparent, like looking through colored glass. Beyond his features, I could see the wall behind him. "Head of maintenance," he replied simply. "Was anyway. Heart attack. 3 months after the accident. Guilt, probably. I signed off on that car because Thomas insisted. Been trying to make it right ever since." I backed away, my camera clutched forgotten in my trembling hands. "This isn't real," I whispered. "You're not real." He smiled sadly. "Real enough. We're all still here. Everyone who couldn't leave after what happened. Thomas most of all." As if summoned by his name, the temperature in the room plummeted. The maintenance man's expression changed to one of fear. "He doesn't like visitors," he warned. "Doesn't like anyone who might tell the truth. You should go. Now." A thunderous sound erupted from below, the mechanical groan of the roller coaster's lift chain engaging. Metal screeched against metal as the systems of the Thunderbolt, dormant for 15 years, struggled to life. I ran. Down the stairs, through the service entrance, back into the main park grounds. Behind me, I could hear the coaster's car climbing the lift hill, the rhythmic Click, click, click of its ascent echoing through the abandoned park. Impossible. Utterly impossible. As I sprinted past the carousel, its lights blazed to life, Calliope music blaring at a deafening volume. The carved animals began to move, rotating at an unnaturally fast pace. Standing on one of the horses, the frightened-looking one I'd noticed earlier, was a small boy in a Wonderland t-shirt, his form as transparent as the maintenance man's had been. "He won't let us leave," the child called out as I ran past. "Daddy says we have to stay until everyone forgets what he did." I didn't stop until I reached the perimeter fence. As I squeezed through the same gap I'd entered through, I looked back one final time. Wonderland Park stood silent and dark once more, as if the lights and sound had been nothing but imagination. But I knew what I'd seen, and my camera had been recording the entire time. When I reviewed the footage later that night in my hotel room, most of it showed nothing but darkness and my own frightened breathing. But in one frame, captured in the mechanical room of the Thunderbolt, a logbook lay open to an entry I hadn't seen during my visit. Written in firm, authoritative handwriting, "I, Thomas Hargrove, hereby certify that all rides, including the Thunderbolt Karmer 7, are in perfect working order for the weekend of July 17 to 18, 2010. Any staff raising concerns about safety issues will be immediately terminated." Below it, scrawled in what looked like a child's handwriting, "Daddy knew. Daddy always knew." I've shared this story not to sensationalize tragedy, but because the families of those affected by the Wonderland disaster deserve the truth. Thomas Hargrove didn't just lose his son that day, he sacrificed him to pride and profit. And now in that decaying park on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, the echoes of his crime play out night after night, a purgatory of his own making. Some abandoned places are empty, but others are filled with truth that refuses to be buried. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear it in the distant sound of a child's laughter that ends too suddenly. I never thought I'd end up back in the suburbs. After years of city life, packed trains, noisy streets, 24-hour diners, I promised myself I'd never trade it all for white fences and cul-de-sacs. But when my job went remote and rent in the city became ridiculous, I caved. I found a modest 2-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. It was nothing special, but it had a garage, a small backyard, and the kind of silence I hadn't heard in years. The house had been on the market for a while, which was surprising given the price. The listing called it a motivated sale, and when I toured it, I understood why. There was nothing wrong per se, but something felt off. The walls had been painted a shade too white. The air inside was still, like the house was holding its breath. The realtor rushed through the viewing, barely meeting my eyes. I moved in at the beginning of spring. The neighbors were distant but polite, nods from across driveways, short hellos at the mailbox. The street was quiet, too quiet. No kids, no music. Even the dogs seemed subdued. It felt like I had stepped into someone else's idea of a perfect life, one that didn't quite fit me. The first few weeks passed in a blur of unpacking and adjusting. I turned the second bedroom into a home office, mounted a TV in the living room, and tried to get used to the sound of absolute stillness at night. Sometimes it was comforting. Other times, it made me feel like I was the only person alive on the block. Every night around 2:30 a.m., I would wake up, not to a sound, but to the absence of one. Like the silence had deepened into something unnatural. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had disturbed me. My phone never showed alerts. The security system didn't chirp. It was just me, awake, with this subtle dread crawling beneath my skin. A few times I thought I heard something downstairs. Not loud, just a soft creak, like a floorboard under weight. I'd sit up, heart racing, but when I tiptoed downstairs, the house would be as I left it. Nothing moved, no doors open. I chalked it up to settling wood, old pipes, an overactive mind. Still, I started locking the bedroom door at night. I began to notice something strange about the house across the street. It was nearly identical to mine. Same layout, same front porch, but I never saw anyone go in or out. No cars in the driveway, no lights turning on. The lawn was always perfectly trimmed. The trash bins set out like clockwork, but no one ever seemed to touch them. One night, unable to sleep, I stood by the window watching the street. The neighborhood was bathed in a pale orange glow from the street lamps. I stared at that house across from mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement behind the curtain of an upstairs window. Just a flicker, like someone pulling back for a second. The next morning I walked over, telling myself I was just being neighborly. I rang the bell. No answer. I knocked. Once, twice. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I noticed something. A faint buzzing sound, like static, coming from somewhere inside. It stopped as soon as I stepped off the porch. Later that week, a package meant for the house was delivered to mine by mistake. No name, just the address. I brought it over again. No one answered, so I left it on the doorstep. The next morning it was gone. That house became an itch in my mind. Something about it wasn't right. It was late, well past midnight, when I heard it. A knock. Not on my front door, but on the glass of my back sliding door. It wasn't loud, but it was precise, 3 evenly spaced taps. Not the wind. Not an animal, a human knock. I froze in the hallway. Every hair on my body stood up as if electrified. The kind of fear that doesn't just creep in, it detonates inside you. My brain scrambled for logic. I hadn't heard footsteps on the deck, no rustling of bushes, not even the distant hum of a car. Just the knock. I moved slowly, each footstep placed carefully on the hardwood to avoid a creak. My hand reached into the kitchen drawer and closed around the cold metal of the flashlight. I didn't turn it on yet. Instead, I turned off the overhead light so I wouldn't cast a silhouette through the curtains, then edged toward the sliding glass door. The curtain was slightly ajar, just enough to let in the pale wash of moonlight. I held my breath, leaned forward and peeked. No one, but something was there. Pressed gently against the glass as if placed with care was a key. Small, brass, tarnished at the edges. It looked old, maybe antique. My heart hammered. I waited a full minute, watching the yard, the fence, the trees. Nothing moved. No shadows, no breeze. Finally, I slid the door open just a few inches, just enough to reach out and snatch the key off the doormat. I shut the door quickly and locked it with shaky hands. The key was heavier than it looked. No tag, no number. Just cold, smooth metal with tiny scratches worn into its surface. I stood there for a long time, just holding it in my palm, as if trying to absorb some kind of message it carried. The next day, under daylight, I tried it in every lock in the house. Front door, garage, attic, even the old electrical box outside. Nothing. It didn't fit anywhere. It didn't belong here. I nearly threw it out. Held it over the trash can even. But something kept my fingers clenched. I placed it on the nightstand instead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the house dead silent, staring at the key under the pale green glow of my alarm clock. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw endless, narrow hallways, locked doors lining each side. I never had the key in my dream, only the sense that something was behind one of those doors, waiting. I must have drifted off after 3 a.m. When I woke, sunlight spilled across the sheets. The key was gone. I found myself back at the window the following night, staring at the house across the street. My gut told me that's where the key had come from. That's where the noise was rooted. The air around me felt thick with anticipation, as though the house itself was daring me to come closer. That house was the answer. The sky was overcast. the moon barely peeking through the gauzy clouds as I stepped out, flashlight in one hand, gloves in the other. My footsteps were muffled against the cool asphalt as I crossed the street. Every house on the block seemed to be asleep, drapes drawn tight, porch lights off. I stopped at the curb in front of the house. Its windows stared blankly outward, glass panes reflecting the sparse light from the street lamp. I stepped onto the porch and tested the front door. Locked, as expected. My breath clouded faintly in the air as I paused, listening. Nothing. No creak of stairs, no hum of a refrigerator, just the low rustle of wind moving through distant trees. I moved around back, passing through the side gate. The latch stuck slightly, then gave way with a metallic shriek that sliced through the stillness. I tensed, waiting for a light to flicker on somewhere nearby. Nothing. The backyard was as meticulously maintained as the front. Grass trimmed, bushes shaped, everything too pristine. It felt artificial, like a movie set. The back door was painted the same dull beige as the front. I turned the handle, more out of habit than hope. It opened. Inside, the air was stale, untouched for what felt like years. The temperature dropped several degrees the moment I stepped in. My flashlight flicked on, casting a sharp cone of white that cut through floating dust particles like a blade. Everything was covered in white sheets, furniture mummified in cotton. The floorboards beneath the carpeted hall let out long, low creaks under my weight, as though complaining. But the worst part wasn't the smell or the stillness, it was the oppressive silence. It didn't feel empty. It felt like someone was holding their breath with me, just out of sight. Room by room, I moved cautiously. The kitchen was spotless. No dishes, no magnets on the fridge. The living room looked staged, like something from a catalog. No family photos, no books. The hallway was lined with closed doors. Each one I opened revealed a perfectly made bed, untouched toiletries, neatly folded towels. It was too perfect, too unlived in. And then I saw it, the basement door, set slightly ajar at the end of the hallway, just beyond the kitchen. A thin sliver of darkness peeked out like a waiting mouth. I approached, my gloved hand resting on the old brass doorknob. It was warm. I pushed it open slowly, and the hinges groaned, long and low, as though reluctant to give way. The staircase descended into pitch blackness. I clicked my flashlight back on and began to move downward, one creaking step at a time. Each stair underfoot made a brittle cracking sound that echoed too long in the space below. The deeper I went, the colder it became. The air was thick with dust and something metallic. I reached the bottom and swept the flashlight across the room. At first, I thought it was a mirror leaning against the far wall, reflecting the beam back at me. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't a mirror. It was a pane of reinforced glass, bolted into the wall. Behind it was a small observation room. Inside were rows of monitors mounted on the wall, each flickering softly with static and black and white footage. The screens cycled through camera angles, driveways, backyards, living rooms, all from this block, including mine. I saw my kitchen, my hallway, even my bedroom. In the middle of the room sat a single office chair. A faded sweatshirt was draped over it. The seat was pulled out slightly, turned toward the monitors. I took a slow step closer, pressing a palm to the glass. The chair was still warm. I stepped back instinctively, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the basement door slamming shut above me. A thunderous crack that echoed through the cement walls. Then came the footsteps. Steady. Measured. Descending the stairs behind me. Someone else was in the house.